Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more hip hop news and, of course, the controversial Glorilla interview. Well, at least from her sister's interview with TMZ, which came out of left field. It felt like it was something very random, but it's an important topic, especially when it comes to not just only hip hop but just Black culture, because there's so many different angles or ways to look at this. For the simple fact of just from a cultural aspect, but also from an entertainer aspect, what they go through and the things they face for the past decades. For decades and decades on, this is not a new thing, but it is one of those topics that comes up every so often. And we've seen artists go through this before, whether it be Jay Z talking about family members asking for money, or back in the day used to be Magic Johnson. Even more recent with um, the guy who's also been very um, controversial. Just any artist that you can think of has gone through this issue, whether public or in private. It's a natural part of life. If you win the lottery, people are going to come out the woodworks, or you get some kind of new superstardom, people are going to think you have all the money. But this Glorilla incident takes it to another level, and it's more personal. And I'm kind of surprised that TMZ covered this, but it did bring a lot of eyes to their platform. It did bring up a great discussion of how much does somebody owe, especially as a family member, because there are a lot of times entitlement issues and issues that people have rooted in entitlement, especially when it comes to one of your family members making it or somebody personally making it, because some people are under the influence that once a family member or a friend makes it, I made it. But that's something we have to discuss today because that's a very interesting topic. And it's not easy on the forefront. It's not complicated, but it's all about where your moral compass is and what your makeup is. So Gorilla's sister said that her mother still works at FedEx and her dad just retired, and the only reason he retired is because his time was up as far as retirement goes, so he was eligible for retirement. That's the only reason why he retired. Now, I remember seeing Glorilla on, I wanna say it was the Jennifer Hudson show, maybe a couple years ago, and her dad popped on the screen, and he was wearing the Postal Service uniform, when he was actually talking to her, and, I thought it was interesting then that he worked at, the Postal Service, but a lot of people don't realize that even when you make a lot of money and your parents are older, they still wanna work and things like that, even if it's part-time, or they wanna feel, you know, they wanna be active and they wanna be productive. So that a job that they had that they might have worked for, 20 plus years, they still wanna be affiliated with the job. There's insurance benefits, things like that. They make their own income, and then there's a sense of pride, from older people wanting to work and things like that. Now, younger people quit their job at the drop of a hat and not think about it. But when you're older, there's a sense of pride in working. There's a sense of, independence when you're working, even if somebody's providing for you. So I don't think that's an issue per se when it comes to Glorilla parents thing. And like I said, I don't know them or the sister, but just on the outside looking in, I noticed that a lot of older people, once they work the job for a long time, or even not a long time, they just have a sense of not entitlement. They have a sense of pride, and they have a sense of loyalty to the companies that they work for, especially when they've worked there for decades, despite of if they don't need the job anymore. Sometimes they still come to the job because a lot of people say once they stop working, then they started deteriorating, and then that's when eventually they pass away. Um, so that thing, that part of the story wasn't the issue for me. The story was like the entitlement and also the distribution of money thing, because TMZ asked the sister, they said, "Hey, if hypothetically your sister has $2 million, how much should she give the family?" And the thing that they said was, well, the sister said $2,500, which caught me off guard because I'm expecting her to say, 200,000, maybe 100,000. somewhere in, the six, five figure range. But when she quoted a four-figure price, a lot of people kind of laughed at that. Even the TMZ people who interviewed her laughed at it because they were like, "All of this is over $2,500. Maybe you should have asked her, or maybe you could have had a different way about this." But just to go on a TMZ interview for $2,500, it seemed a bit excessive. It seemed a bit bush league, but it just shows you the sense of entitlement and the sense of um, arrogance that one can have as far as it relates to your family's wealth or somebody that having that kind of wealth, or maybe necessarily wealth, but just that sense of being famous. And then usually people equate famous to being rich, which is not always the case. That's a flawed perception of things, especially in today's society. Just because you're famous doesn't mean you have money. Um, a lot of videos go viral and a lot of people go viral, but doesn't necessarily mean that they have access to money. Now, they might have access to opportunities from going viral, depending on how big the moment was, how much content that they have put out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the money. So it all takes time and it all takes, a little bit of finagling, but it's not that easy. And then this whole Glorilla family thing was a lot to process because there's so many different variables, right? So one of the things I thought about was Glorilla is in the music industry. She only has one album per se. She has a couple like EPs and stuff like that, but not necessarily albums. So she has one album. But when you think about the music industry, and this is from the outside looking in, listening to many pundits, listening to many podcasts, and many people that's been in the music industry, is that the music industry is not as liquid as you think. So the liquidity of the music industry is very fragile. So unless you have an artist who's been established for a while, took care of their money, been in great contracts or at least in decent terms of contract, um, then you can see more liquidity. But for the most part, it's not like sports where they have guaranteed contracts. Like you might see an athlete get $100 million deal, 50 million or 60 million might be guaranteed. They will see that money long as they don't do anything morally wrong or um, just steps outside the lines or something like that. But for the most part, they're going to get at least that 60 million, and they have that cash liquid. Now in the music industry, it's streaming now. There's no physical sales. There are a lot of bad contracts. There's been bad contract talk recently, um, all throughout the industry, and it's not going to change. It's been this way for decades. So if anybody knows anything about the music industry, even just being a casual fan about things, you're going to know that half of these guys that have good contracts, um, they've been done wrong at some point. I've seen artists like Rick Ross talk about this before, where he talks about he had a bad contract starting off and he had to work his way out of that deal. And a lot of artists have to work their way out of bad deals. Chaperone talked about it, not even having health insurance. So these guys are not guaranteed a lot of things. They might flaunt a lot of cash like they got it, but that's like I said, that might be all the cash that they have, and they just simplified it down into $20 bills to make it look nice. But a lot of times they get these advances, they get all of these different perks up front, but then on the back end, the money is a lot shorter, especially if you don't produce to the high level. Not to say that Glorilla hasn't done that; she's made a lot of appearances and things like that. But for her only have one album, it's not like she's gonna be raking in the money and she has all this liquid cash. A lot of that stuff is in assets and things like that. So I thought it was another flawed perception to think that, Glorilla would have all this money just because she's hanging out with famous people, hanging out in these fancy cars. A lot of times those is, courtesy of the budget that they have and things like that. A lot of that stuff is just flash in the pan. It's not necessarily, liquid, like I said. And Finesse 2 times definitely went through this with his parents and saying how much money he was giving them, and he doesn't have the contract that he should have, and he's openly talked about this for the last couple of months. It's been pretty public, that he doesn't have a great contract. He's getting juked out of his deal, and I believe he has one album also. So he's trying to get out of the deal and, saying that he made all of the money with the people that he made and they gave him a bad contract and a bad deal and he's unable to get worked out of that deal. So now he's trying to do anything to get out. But it may seem like he has a lot of money because of the way he dresses and the money he flaunts, but then like I said, a lot of that stuff is cosmetic and it's aesthetics. So it's definitely different. But listening to all of this conversation of entitlement and the Glorilla sister issue, I just thought about, you know, I'm not built that way to ask somebody for something just because I'm close to them. If you win the lottery, my pride and the way I'm set up is not built like that. So if I had a business opportunity, I would come to you and probably present it, but I wouldn't come out and just ask for money blatantly, just off the strength of just knowing you or being a family member. Because I wouldn't want that done to me. Because, like I said, when you get money, people come out the woodwork, everybody's trying to kiss your butt. You have so much to go through, and then with the rate of people losing money, that get the money, is very difficult for them to keep the money because they have to tell so many people no. Um, but, if you have a business opportunity or you have something that you wanna and them to invest in, that's different, and they have that choice to tell you no, even if you feel like it's a good idea, but you're not entitled to somebody else's money just because you're family members or because you're friends with them or because did a favor for them a long time ago or something like that. I think it's just heavy entitlement. And like I said before, it's a cultural thing about the money and who's entitled to what. Because the TMC interviewers asked Glorilla, they said, "Hey, why does she have to help you if it's her money?" Um, and she answered it and said that, well, she's flaunting all this money and making it seem like she's this way when she's really not. But I think it was something deeply rooted in the cultural issue of it because it was a white guy and a black guy who was interviewing her. The white guy asked this question, and it had me thinking about to the basketball perspective of a basketball player by the name of Andre Iguodala, who used to um, play in the league in the NBA, multiple time NBA champion. And he said his rookie year in Philadelphia, he was sitting in a rookie like symposium or like seminar about money management. Now, in this class were, cultures of all races, and they asked Iguodala, "Hey, how much money are you spending towards your expenses?" So when he put out his expenses, he said, I'm spending this much money on my mom, this much money on my dad, buying them houses, buying them, fixing their credit, doing things like this, etc. And I believe another player, I want to say it was Kyle Korver, which is a white guy, asked him, he said, "Hey man, why are you paying for your parents?" And it was a cultural issue because a lot of times in the black community, when we get money, we take care of our family, especially our parents. We take care of cousins that we were close to and brothers and sisters. But on the flip side, our white counterparts, um, it seems like they don't. It's not an expectation for them. Like if they get the money, then that's fine, but it's not an entitlement or it's not something that's ingrained in them to say, "Oh well, I'm the parent. Give me this money." It doesn't seem that way. I know it's case by case basis, but from what Andre Iguodala was saying, it feels like that a lot of times it's just ingrained in black people to do so. And that's because a lot of time we don't have those financial advantages that our white counterparts have. So a lot of times when we get the money, we feel like we need to get everybody that we know up to a certain level because we're not usually privileged like that, especially if you're coming from the inner city and you're coming from low budget um, low budget histories and things like that, you don't always have that. So that's that cultural difference I was talking about, having access to that money and what we feel a sense of pride in. Because if you look at most of the athletes, especially the NBA players and NFL players, when they get their not their first contracts, because usually those are not guaranteed and they're a little on the lower end financial wise. But when they get that second contract, that $100 million, $200 million contracts, what is the first video you see? You don't see them buying a car. You don't see them, um, splurging on themselves mostly. Even if they do it, it's behind the scenes. That first video that you'll see of them buying something is usually their mom's a house. That's the first thing. I've seen Aaron Donald buy his dad a pickup truck. I've seen even college athletes now with the NIL deals. The first thing they do is get their moms a house. I've seen Travis Hunter do it when he was at Colorado, I believe. So it's just a cultural thing that you'll see, and sometimes it creates this sense of entitlement, which Glorilla is going through now. So it's very difficult situation. Especially, you'll see this differently depending on the cultural upbringing that you have and your moral compass. But I don't think Glorilla was wrong at any point. Um, if her parents will ask for what they want to, and then if they really felt that way, they would have said something, or there would have been some kind of issue. But I don't think anyone is entitled to her money. Of course, if you want to help your parents who raise you, that's your right, and that's what seems like the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, I think that the sister is not really entitled to anything. And I know Glorilla has like 9 or 10 siblings, so she has a lot of siblings, and if she's giving everybody $2,500, um, that would put her in a trick bag at some point, because eventually you'll have to keep that up, and if you keep doing it, it'll drain you eventually to where you don't have the money, and now everybody's broke. So, and in the words of Yo Gotti, her mentor and the guy she signs to, he said a line, in a rap a long time ago. He's like, "Everybody want me to buy them a car, but then we'll all be broke. Then I'll be back in the hood selling dope." Uh, so it's one of the famous lines that come to fruition from Yo Gotti. One of the lines that definitely holds true in this situation, because a lot of people don't think about that. If I keep giving you money, then you're draining me out of my money. But I think a lot of this stuff too is they're counting her boyfriend's money, which her boyfriend is an NBA player, and he's been in the league for a good while now. So he has that liquid cash, but you can't count the boyfriend's money because that's his money. Even if they were married, that's still their money, and it's not a sense of entitlement to you because you're a family member or a loved one. And that's just unfair to do for somebody in that position, because if the sister, I'm pretty sure, if was in that position, she would feel the same way as Glorilla. Hey, let me get the money and then I can break bread with everybody. But right now, I'm still building a brand. She's still under 25, I believe. Well, now she's under 30 for sure. So she's still young and has a career behind her. But, maybe she can branch off into movies and things like that. But the music industry is not luxurious or lucrative as most people think. A lot of artists, especially in hip hop, make their money outside of music because there's not a lot of money in it because of the streaming era, and there's no physical sales, and it's just chopped up so much. You have to pay producers, and you have to pay the label, and then you get an advance that you have to pay back. So you're starting off in a negative. So a lot of things about the music industry that people just don't understand or want to understand. They just think that you have the money because of the videos and the persona that you have and because you're famous. There's a lot of things that go into it. And, I just think that Glorilla, isn't wrong from the situation. I think the sister was wrong for going out on TMZ and doing that interview, because you could have talked to your sister about it. You could have ended behind the scenes. There are so many different things, but now you put a stain on her name, which can affect her money, which I don't think it will, and I hope it doesn't. But it could. If it does affect her money, then it really affects you too, because if your sister loses deals and loses a claim and things like that, you're basically harming her, which could, in the long run, hurt you. So a lot of people don't think about that. And she probably got paid for the TMZ interview, which wasn't worth the money, especially exposing a family member, especially a family member that, that you were in the wrong with, because you're not entitled to any money. So tell me what your thoughts about this Glorilla incident and just celebrities having money and the sense of entitlement from family members and loved ones. Until next time, I'll see you next time.